The office fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry bees, casting a sterile glow over cubicles that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and despair. Marcus Tate, 28, sat frozen at his desk, his heart pounding as whispers slithered through the open-plan office of Pinnacle Marketing in downtown Seattle. By noon, the rumor had spread like wildfire. Marcus is gay, and he's got a boyfriend. What started as a private moment, his phone lighting up with a sweet text from Javier during a break, had spiraled into a public spectacle. A coworker had glimpsed the message, and now Marcus felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes boring into him. He wasn't ashamed of who he was, but the sting of judgment in those stares made his skin crawl. Marcus had always been the guy who kept his head down. Born in Oakland, raised by a single mom who taught him resilience, he'd clawed his way through college and landed this mid-level marketing job. His warm brown eyes and quick wit made him a favorite among clients, but he'd never been one to flaunt his personal life. Not because he was hiding, but because he believed his work should speak for itself. Yet here he was, the center of a gossip storm, his identity dissected by people who barely knew him. The whispers grew louder when Brian Kessler, the office's self-appointed alpha, sauntered over. At 35, Brian was a senior account manager with a smirk that could curdle milk. His broad shoulders and slicked-back hair gave him an air of untouchable confidence. "So, Marcus," he said, loud enough for the entire floor to hear, "you're one of those guys now, huh? Gotta say, didn't see that coming." Snickers erupted from nearby cubicles. Marcus's jaw tightened. He could have let it slide, could have laughed it off like he always did when Brian's ego filled the room. But something snapped inside him. "What's that supposed to mean, Brian?" His voice was steady, but his hands trembled under the desk. Brian leaned closer, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. "Just saying, man, keep that stuff at home. Nobody needs to know what you do in your personal time." The word personal landed like a jab, and the room went quiet, waiting for Marcus's response. He stood, his 5 feet 10 inches frame feeling taller than ever. "You're right, Brian. Nobody needs to know. So why don't you tell me why my personal life is suddenly your business?" The challenge hung in the air, and for the first time, Brian's smirk faltered. Marcus didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed his jacket and walked out, the weight of the office's stairs following him to the elevator. He wasn't running away, he was regrouping, because Marcus Tate wasn't just going to take this lying down. That evening, Marcus sat on a park bench in Volunteer Park, the Seattle skyline shimmering in the distance. Javier Morales, his boyfriend of 6 months, sat beside him. At 29, Javier was a community organizer with a lean build, curly black hair, and eyes that held a quiet intensity. His Puerto Rican roots showed in the rhythm of his speech, and his warmth had been Marcus's anchor since they'd met at a local art gallery. "You didn't have to confront him like that," Javier said softly, his hand resting on Marcus's. "But I'm proud you did." Marcus sighed, his breath visible in the crisp autumn air. "I'm tired, Javi. Tired of pretending I'm someone I'm not just to make people like Brian comfortable. I've spent years proving I'm good at my job. And now this." Javier squeezed his hand. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. But if you're gonna fight, I'm right here with you." Marcus looked at him, the knot in his chest loosening. Javier's belief in him was like a lifeline. They'd met by chance, bonding over a shared love of street art and late-night tacos. Javier's fearlessness, his ability to walk into any room and own it, had inspired Marcus to be braver. Now he needed that courage more than ever. Back at their shared apartment in Capitol Hill, Marcus couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the day's events, each word from Brian cutting deeper. But it wasn't just Brian. It was the silence of his coworkers, the ones who'd laughed or looked away instead of speaking up. Pinnacle Marketing prided itself on its inclusive culture, with rainbow flags in the lobby every June. Yet when it mattered, no one had his back. By morning, Marcus had a plan. He wasn't going to quit, he was going to make them listen. He spent the weekend digging into the company's policies, researching employment law, and drafting an email. Javier helped, his activist instincts kicking in as they crafted a message that was both professional and unapologetic. On Monday, Marcus walked into the office with his head high. The whispers started again, but this time he didn't flinch. He sent the email to the entire company, including the CEO, outlining what had happened, calling out the toxic culture, and demanding accountability. He didn't just want an apology, he wanted change. By noon, the office was buzzing again. But this time, it wasn't just gossip. People were talking about him, about his courage, about the email that had left Brian red-faced and silent. Marcus didn't know it yet, but his words were about to spark something bigger than he'd ever imagined. The email landed in inboxes across Pinnacle Marketing like a grenade. Subject line: a call for accountability. Marcus had spent hours perfecting it, balancing raw honesty with measured professionalism. "I am a gay man," he wrote, "and I refuse to be shamed for it. The culture of mockery and silence in this office must end." He detailed Brian's comments, the laughter, the lack of support, and cited the company's own diversity policy, which promised a safe workplace for all. He ended with a challenge: if Pinnacle truly stands for inclusion, prove it. By lunchtime, the office was a pressure cooker. Marcus sat at his desk, pretending to focus on a client pitch while stealing glances at his coworkers. Some avoided his gaze, others offered hesitant nods. Brian, predictably, was nowhere to be seen. Likely holed up in a meeting room, licking his wounds. But Marcus wasn't naive. He knew this could backfire. He could be labeled a troublemaker, passed over for promotions, or worse, quietly pushed out. At 2 p.m., an email from the CEO, Diane Larson, hit everyone's inboxes. Diane, a 50-year-old white woman with a reputation for being tough but fair, requested a company-wide meeting at 4 p.m. Marcus's stomach churned. Was this a public dressing down or a chance to be heard? Javier texted him, "You've got this. They can't ignore you now." The meeting room was packed, every chair taken, with latecomers standing against the walls. Diane stood at the front, her silver hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. "We're here to address a serious issue," she began. "Marcus Tate's email has brought to light behavior that contradicts our values. I want to hear from you. All of you." The room went silent. Marcus's heart raced as he stood. "I didn't send that email to start drama," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I sent it because I'm tired of hiding who I am to avoid comments like the ones Brian made. I deserve to feel safe here, and so does everyone else." A murmur rippled through the room. Then, to Marcus's surprise, Priya Sharma, a 32-year-old Indian-American graphic designer, stood up. "I saw what happened," she said, "and I didn't say anything. I'm sorry, Marcus. I should have spoken up." Her voice cracked, and Marcus felt a lump in his throat. Priya's apology was a crack in the dam. Others followed. Jamal Carter, a 40-year-old black man from IT, shared how he'd overheard homophobic jokes in the break room for years. Elena Ruiz, a 27-year-old Latina copywriter, admitted she'd stayed silent out of fear of rocking the boat. The room was alive with confessions, regrets, and stories. Some about sexuality, others about race or gender. Marcus realized this wasn't just about him anymore. But not everyone was on board. Brian, who'd slipped into the meeting late, stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of defiance. "This is getting out of hand," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "It was a joke, Marcus. You're making a mountain out of nothing." The air grew thick. Diane's eyes narrowed. "Brian, a joke doesn't leave someone feeling unsafe. You owe Marcus an apology." Brian scoffed. "I'm not apologizing for free speech." He stormed out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Marcus felt a mix of vindication and unease. Brian's exit wasn't a victory. It was a warning of how deep the resistance ran. That night, Marcus and Javier sat in their apartment, a bottle of wine between them. "You shook things up," Javier said, his eyes shining with pride. "But what's next? They're listening now, but will it last?" Marcus didn't have an answer. He'd started something, but the path forward was murky. He leaned against Javier, drawing strength from his warmth. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm not backing down." The next day, Diane called Marcus into her office. "Your email was a wake-up call," she said. "I've failed to foster the culture I promised. I want you to lead a task force to overhaul our diversity and inclusion policies. Will you do it?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard. This was more than he'd expected, a chance to shape the company's future. But it also meant more scrutiny, more pressure. He thought of Javier, of his mom's relentless optimism, of the co-workers who'd spoken up. "Yes," he said, "I'm in." As he left Diane's office, Marcus felt a spark of hope. But he also knew Brian wasn't done. The man's pride was wounded, and men like Brian didn't stay quiet for long. Marcus threw himself into the task force with a fire he hadn't felt in years. He spent late nights researching best practices, drafting training modules, and meeting with coworkers who'd never spoken up before. Priya and Elena joined the team, their guilt from the meeting fueling their commitment. Jamal offered tech support, creating an anonymous feedback system for employees to share experiences. The task force wasn't just about policy. It was about giving a voice to those who'd been silenced. But the office wasn't a fairy tale. Brian's absence from the task force was conspicuous, and his clique, mostly older account managers, grumbled about woke nonsense in hushed tones. Marcus overheard snippets in the break room. "He's milking this for attention. The company's fine as it is." Each comment was a pinprick. But Marcus kept his focus. He had to. At home, Javier was his rock. One evening, as they cooked dinner in their cramped kitchen, Javier chopped onions with a precision that matched his passion for justice. "You're changing things, Marcus," he said, wiping his eyes. "But you're carrying a lot. Don't burn out." Marcus stirred the sizzling peppers, his mind heavy. "I'm not just fighting for me, Javi. It's for everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong." He paused, his voice softening. "Like you did before you came out." Javier set down his knife, his expression raw. "Yeah, took me years to stop hiding. You're doing that for others now." He pulled Marcus into a hug, the smell of onions and cumin wrapping around them like a promise. But the fight wasn't easy. A week later, Marcus found an anonymous note on his desk. "Stop pushing your agenda, or you'll regret it." His blood ran cold. He showed it to Diane, who promised an investigation, but Marcus knew the truth. Brian, or someone close to him, was sending a message. The note wasn't the only pushback. During a task force presentation, a senior manager named Greg, 45, interrupted Marcus mid-sentence. "This is all well and good, but we're a business, not a therapy session. Clients don't care about our feelings. Greg's tone was patronizing, his gray eyes cold. Marcus took a breath, channeling Javier's fire. Clients care about results, Greg. And we get better results when people feel valued, not attacked. Studies show diverse teams outperform others by 15% on average. You want numbers? There they are. The room went quiet, and Greg sat back, flustered. The task force gained traction. Diane approved mandatory training sessions, and Marcus led the first one, sharing his story with a room of skeptical faces. To his surprise, some softened. A junior analyst, Sophie, a 24-year-old white woman, approached him after. "I didn't get it before," she said. "But hearing you, I want to help." Momentum was building, but so was the tension. Brian returned from a personal leave with a smugness that set Marcus on edge. He didn't confront Marcus directly, but his presence was a storm cloud. Rumors swirled that Brian was rallying support to undermine the task force, whispering to higher-ups about divisive changes. One night, Marcus and Javier attended a fundraiser for a local LGBTQ+ youth center. The event was a burst of color. Drag queens, activists, and allies laughing under fairy lights. Javier introduced Marcus to his mentor, Carla, a 60-year-old black trans woman who'd fought for gay rights since the 80s. "You're stirring the pot, young man," Carla said, her voice warm but firm. "That's good, but watch your back. Change scares people." Carla's words lingered. Marcus felt the weight of his mission, but also its purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was part of something bigger. Back home, he and Javier danced to old salsa records, their laughter a brief escape from the battle ahead. By the end of the month, the task force had drafted a new code of conduct, emphasizing zero tolerance for harassment. Diane praised their work, but Marcus sensed resistance brewing. Brian's allies were circling, and the anonymous note still haunted him. He knew the real test was coming. The anonymous note wasn't a one-off. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus found 2 more, slipped into his desk drawer, tucked under his keyboard. "Back off or else. You're tearing this place apart." Each one felt like a punch, but Marcus refused to let fear win. He shared them with Diane, who escalated the issue to HR, but the investigation stalled. No cameras, no witnesses, no proof. Marcus felt the walls closing in, but Javier's voice in his head kept him grounded. "You're stronger than this." The task force pressed on. They rolled out training sessions across departments, and Marcus noticed a shift. More employees engaged, sharing stories of microaggressions or exclusion. Even Greg, the skeptical senior manager, started asking questions instead of dismissing ideas. But Brian's clique remained a thorn. They skipped trainings, citing client emergencies, and their whispers grew bolder. Marcus overheard one of them, a 38-year-old account manager named Todd, muttering, "This diversity crap is ruining the vibe." Marcus's breaking point came during a client pitch. The task force had proposed adding inclusive language to Pinnacle's marketing campaigns, a move Diane supported. But Brian, leading the pitch, sabotaged it. "Our clients don't want this," he said to the room, ignoring Marcus's data showing 70% of consumers preferred brands with inclusive values. The client, a progressive tech startup, looked uncomfortable, and Marcus's heart sank. Brian was undermining him in front of everyone. After the meeting, Marcus confronted him in the hallway. "What was that, Brian? You tanked the pitch on purpose." Brian smirked. "I'm protecting the company, Marcus. You're pushing too hard, and it's gonna cost us." "Cost us?" Marcus's voice rose. "You're the one costing us with your ego." The client saw through you. Heads turned, and Marcus didn't care. He was done playing nice. That evening, Javier noticed the strain in Marcus's eyes. They sat on their balcony, the Seattle skyline a blur of lights. "You're fighting a war," Javier said, his voice soft but urgent. "But you don't have to do it alone." Marcus nodded, but the weight of the notes, Brian's sabotage, and the constant scrutiny was crushing him. He felt like he was shouting into a void. Then Javier had an idea. "What if you take this outside the office? Get the community involved." The next day, Marcus reached out to Carla, who connected him with local activists. They organized a public forum at the youth center, inviting Pinnacle employees to discuss workplace inclusion. Marcus didn't expect much turnout, but when the day came, the room was packed. Not just with allies like Priya and Elena, but with coworkers he barely knew. Even Sophie, the junior analyst, brought friends. Marcus spoke first, his voice raw. "I didn't choose this fight, but I'm in it because no one should feel ashamed for who they are." He shared the notes, the sabotage, the silence. The room listened, rapt. Then Carla took the mic, her presence commanding. "This isn't just Marcus's fight. It's all of ours. If Pinnacle wants to be a leader, it starts with you." The forum sparked something. Employees who'd stayed quiet began speaking up at work. Diane announced a third-party audit of the company's culture, a move Marcus hadn't dared hope for. But Brian wasn't done. He cornered Marcus in the parking lot one evening, his face twisted with anger. "You think you're some hero? You're gonna crash and burn, and I'll be there when you do." Marcus stood his ground, his heart pounding. "Keep talking, Brian. You're only proving my point." He walked away, adrenaline surging, knowing this wasn't over. The audit was a game changer. The third-party investigators interviewed every employee, uncovering a pattern of unchecked microaggressions, not just against Marcus, but across race, gender, and sexuality. The report, presented at a tense all-hands meeting, named Brian as a key instigator. Diane didn't hesitate. "Effective immediately, Brian Kessler is no longer with Pinnacle Marketing," she announced. The room erupted in murmurs, some shocked, others relieved. Brian's exit wasn't the end. The audit exposed a culture that had failed too many, and Diane leaned into Marcus's task force to fix it. They implemented mandatory anti-bias training, a clear reporting system for harassment, and regular town halls. Marcus became a reluctant figurehead, his story inspiring others to speak out. Sophie started an employee resource group for LGBTQ+ staff, and even Greg joined, admitting he'd been wrong to dismiss the work. But the victory wasn't clean. Marcus knew some still saw him as that guy, the one who'd rocked the boat. He felt the weight of their resentment, but also their respect. He changed the office, and that was enough. One crisp autumn evening, Marcus and Javier returned to Volunteer Park, the same bench where they'd shared their fears months ago. The city glowed in the distance, and Marcus felt lighter than he had in years. "I couldn't have done this without you," he told Javier, his voice thick with emotion. Javier smiled, his hand finding Marcus's. "You did this because of who you are. I just got to watch you shine." They sat in silence, the world around them quiet but alive. Marcus thought of his mom, who'd cried with pride when he told her about the audit. He thought of Carla, whose wisdom had guided him. And he thought of the coworkers who'd stood with him, proving change was possible. The office was never the same. Pinnacle became a case study in corporate accountability, with Marcus's email framed in the lobby as a reminder. He didn't stay forever. 2 years later, he and Javier started a nonprofit to support workplace inclusion. But that evening in the park, as leaves fell around them, Marcus knew he'd fought for something bigger than himself. He'd fought for love, for truth, and for a world where no one had to hide.